Hi there. Today we're going to be doing server-side HTML rendering with MooServer and Pebble templates. MooServer is an open source web server that is very easy to get up and start running. You can see the instructions here. Add a single dependency. Start serving HTTP responses. Pebble is a separate project, also open source, which can convert HTML templates along with Java objects into HTML. We can combine these two frameworks to render server-side HTML with Java very easily. Let's just take a quick look at how Pebble works. So we add a single Maven dependency like so. We can create a template file which our other pages can inherit from, allowing certain areas to be specified by child templates. Then we can extend that template in a web page and enter in the data and render HTML based on objects we create from our web handler. To actually do this, we create a Pebble engine. We point it at a Pebble HTML page. We create a view model and we write it into a writer. Now we can combine this with MooServer, whose response has a writer, in order to write this directly to the browser, allowing us to do things like load data from a database and use that in the output. We will be working on a sample restaurants application that we've been working on in a previous video. Here it is here. It already has a database, which we set up and configure here. We have already got code that can read from a restaurant table that we added over here. And we've put a little bit of data in there already. So we want to render these as HTML. And then we start the web server. Meanwhile, we've got some static file handling over here. So just some basic HTML and a style sheet. And it currently looks like this. So we simply want to replace the hard-coded restaurant names and descriptions here with data from our database. First of all, I'm just going to try writing some HTML directly to the response object without Pebble, just to make sure we can read from the database. So I'm going to make a handler for our homepage. Let's just call that home handler. Now we're going to need restaurant data from our database. That class has it, so we can just create this class here. Call that DB. Okay, implement the methods, handle, and to make this render HTML. We can start setting the content type. Now we can loop through all of the restaurants in our database. And whoops, I don't have a reference to the database yet. Let's just make this a record instead. Okay, now we can access it. So we have a getAll method. We can simply iterate through all of those. And we can just send little bits of HTML just like this. Now, to be clear, this is not the way to do it. This already has security vulnerabilities because we're not encoding things properly. This is one of the reasons to use template frameworks, as they will make that much safer to use. But let's just see what happens when we reload. And these are the 3 restaurant names from our database. Now what you want to do is basically convert this index file into a Pebble template. We're going to take it out of the web folder, which MooServer is serving directly, because we won't want people to be able to access the raw file. So let's create a directory called views. And I'm going to move that in here. And I'm going to rename the extension to .html.peb. Okay, IntelliJ users, a couple of tips. First of all, make sure you've got the Pebble plugin installed so you get autocomplete in your Pebble templates. And also we want to make sure that we can take advantage of IntelliJ's HTML and JavaScript autocomplete too. So we need to search up the data template language. Basically, we're going to say for Pebble templates in this project, just assume they are HTML. Okay, There we have it, restaurants. And now we can edit this in HTML. So we're going to have one of these for each restaurant object. What we want to do is pass in a list of restaurant objects and then iterate through them. So if I type 4, press tab, I can get into a pebble loop. So let's assume we have a model value called restaurants. And we are going to loop through them and get the restaurant out. So let's pull this up here. Now, once again, IntelliJ and Pebble can help us with autocomplete here. We can introduce a peb variable hint. And in this way, we can tell the IDE what the type of the restaurant is. This is actually a list of restaurants. So let's go java.util.list restaurant. Okay, and now we can put in our text replacement lines. So that is with double open curly braces, and I can type restaurant dot, and notice the name there. And we can put the description too. Now these are by default HTML encoded already, so safe to use. Okay, this is now ready, but we need to render this using Pebble, and we may need to pass in a list of restaurants when we do so. So let's try and do that here. We're going to keep a reference to this first, and then delete this. We basically follow the example from the Pebble homepage. We create a Pebble engine builder. For now, we'll just build that. Now we need to get a reference to our template. So to do that, we call engine.getTemplate. Now this is a path relative to the class path. Our class path root is resources, so we're going to go /views/index.html.peb. Next up, we create our view model, and that can just be a hash map of names to arbitrary objects. And we're going to put our restaurants list in the model. And finally, we're going to write this to the Moose server response output stream. So we've got a writer in the response object, and now we can simply evaluate the writer with the model. So pretty straightforward. Let's try that. So this was before, and I refresh. Now I'm just going to add one more page quickly, so a view restaurant page, so that we can see the best way to clean up and refactor when we have multiple pages. So I'll just duplicate this file and call it view restaurant. Okay. Let's make that an absolute path to the CSS. Now this time, this is going to have a single restaurant. Okay, we're going to call it restaurant. I'm going to stick this right at the top. I'm going to put the restaurant name here. And we'll put the restaurant description here and delete all of that. And let's quickly add a second handler to view a single restaurant. So I'm going to duplicate this class as well. Let's call it view restaurant handler. Okay, let's register this handler at restaurants/ID. Okay. So this time, instead of loading all the restaurants, we just get a single restaurant. And we can get that from the path parameter. So that is a single restaurant. This will return null if there is no restaurant with that ID. So let's just throw a new not found exception in that case, so that'll do. Okay, the rest of it is mostly similar to before. This time we've got a single restaurant in our model. And our view name has changed to view restaurant.html, but maybe you're noticing already a bunch of similarities here. Finally, let's just quickly add a link to our homepage. So we're going to go /restaurants/ and then the restaurant.id. And we just say view more. Okay, I restart. Reload the home page, and hopefully we can view single restaurants now. Time to refactor then. Let's look at these two handlers. Now, if I move this down here, they are mostly the same, except for the template name and the data we put into the model. And there's also a bit of optimization here. We should only create an engine once and reuse it for each request. So what I like to do is create a class just for rendering HTML. Let's call it view renderer. And when we create these, we want to create one engine, and then we want to have a method for rendering, and maybe a helper method to create the model as well. So let's create a factory method to create these. So I'm going to create new Pebble engine builder.build for now. And we're going to return a view renderer with the engine. We're going to optimize this a little bit later on as well. Okay, and let's create a field for that. Great. Okay, next up I just want a little method to create a model. I do this because I often want default values which live on every model to be available. For example, the request object. So let's go ahead and create a model, and let's pass it the moo request when we do it, and we just return a new hash map. Well, first let's stick the request on it. Now we can access any request object. And finally, let's create a render method. So for this, we need to know the name of the template. We need the model object that has been created, and we need the response. So let's get the response first, then the model, then the view name, and we're basically taking this code here along with this code, and we'll pass in the view name. Well, let's always assume it's in the views directory. So we'll go views/view name. Okay. This probably wants to throw an exception, which is fine. And now we can start using this view renderer from our handlers. So let's upgrade our home handler first. Let's assume there is a view renderer. Just call it renderer. And now we can use the renderer. First of all, to make a model from the request. Okay. And just as before, we can put the restaurants on it. And then we can render it with our response, the model we made, and the template name is now just index.html.peb. And there's no point to really put this here either, is there? So let's put that in the render method as well. Okay. And we should be able to delete all of that. Okay, now our handler is looking much smaller. Let's do something similar for our view restaurant handler. So if I come up here, get a reference to the view renderer, and this is just a single restaurant, and this is called view restaurant. Okay, and now we just need to create a view renderer here, which is what these things would want. So let's pass in the renderer. Let's create that. Okay, there we go. Right, so if we refresh this, everything is still working. Now there's a couple of issues to sort out still. So first of all, let's go ahead and try to change the template. So let's stick some exclamation marks at the end of a restaurant name and refresh. you'll notice they're not there. If we come back and restart our server, then they are added. So we definitely don't want to have to restart our web server every single time we make a change to our template. So we're going to fix that. Now, the reason this happens is that the Pebble engine is loading files from the class path by default. This is actually good when we are packaging our server into an Uberjar, but not so good for local development. Locally, we want to load from the file system. So we need to know, is this local development or a deployed instance? And we can just have it as local parameter on our create method. And we can use this, change the builder depending on whether it's local or not. So let's take a reference to the builder like that. Okay, and we're going to say if it is local, then something, otherwise something else. So if it's local, we want to change the way that Pebble loads the files. So we're going to use a file loader like that. And we should set the character set to UTF-8. And we're going to set the prefix. So this is the source directory prefix, which is source main resources, okay, /views. And then we can specify this on the loader method on the Pebble engine builder. And we can turn off caching as well. Now we're going to do a similar thing if it's not local. We're going to use the class path loader. That needs to get the character set as well. And we're going to set the class path prefix to be views / and we're going to tell Pebble engine to use that. And we want to cache things to be faster when we're deployed. So I just need to delete this prefix here so that now when we get a template, it's just based on the name itself, because we have the views prefixes here. Okay, so let's try both of these up front. So let's pretend we're not running locally and the behavior should be the same as before. So things are still working. If I try to change the file, it does not get updated. Okay, that's expected. Now, if we are in local mode, I need to restart once to switch that. Once again, things are working. And now we can update without restarting the server. Okay, the last thing I want to cover is having a base template. So if we look at our views, they share a lot of HTML, especially in the header region. So what we can do is specify all of this in a template and then allow each view to specify the main block here. So I'm going to duplicate one of these. I'll call it _template html.peb. Okay, we want to keep all of this constant. Then we're going to have a block. We'll just call it main. Now we can come into each page and we can say that this extends _template.peb. We're going to have a block called main. And that is just going to have this in it. End block. Okay. Let's do the same for viewing a single restaurant. Copy those. Right, we're going to take it like that. End the block. And let's refresh. Okay, we've lost our CSS. Let's have a look at our template. Okay, we need to have an absolute URL path there. Refresh. Okay, and you can see we are able to update our template without restarting our server. And everything is working. So that's all you need to get started rendering HTML on the server side with MooServer and Pebble templates. There are a lot of features that I haven't shown you, but once you get started with this, you can have a look around the Pebble website to learn more. As always, the code is available on GitHub. There is a link in the description below. Happy hacking!